Martin, you brought this up. You did Trolling and Rolling last night.
I did.
And one of your topics questions was about the ESPN poll of players. Was it 100 players, 103 players?
I believe it was 100.
All types of questions about quarterbacks, most underrated, most overrated, so on and so forth. And one of the questions they were asked is, who's the GOAT, the greatest quarterback of all time? 85 of the respondents said Tom Brady. A few said someone else. They didn't tell us who. That makes me think maybe they were jokes, that they guys threw in all types of crazy names.
Right.
But 7 said Patrick Mahomes. And one player, anonymously, of course, said, if Mahomes wins his 3rd straight and becomes the first quarterback ever to win 3 straight Super Bowls, and the first team, of course, would be the Chiefs, then that changes everything. So I want to ask you, Martin Weiss, where are you right now on the GOAT conversation in the NFL? And tell me where you've got Mahomes ranked. And what would it take for him to become the GOAT? Will a three-peat do it? Because obviously they're on the cusp. They have a great chance. I think they're better on paper than they were last year, even though they lost L'Jarius Sneed. Mm-hmm. They got I think they strengthened their receiving core, which will be big.
They're definitely better on offense on paper than they were last year. There's no doubt about that.
Probably not on defense, but the thing about the defense is it had a lot of young players. Yes. And so those young players that remain should get better. So that's kind of what I mean there. But go ahead and share what your thoughts are on the GOAT and where Mahomes ranks and what you think he needs to do to surpass Brady.
So I think when we're looking at who's the GOAT, right, the greatest of all time, there's kind of 2 avenues to look at it. One, accomplishments, the other one being ability, right? I think when you look at, and I think obviously the combination of those two really makes your GOAT argument unassailable. When you look at a guy like Tom Brady, he's got all the accolades in the world, and on top of that, won a ton of games, right? But when you look at a guy like Patrick Mahomes, he's got a lot of the same accolades, but if he gets this three-peat, in my opinion, there's going to be the prevailing sentiment. There will be a very, very loud minority and one that grows exponentially at the end of this season if they end up pulling off a three-peat in the Kansas City Chiefs.
It'll be huge. I agree.
I think
like that poll next year, and we talked about it last night, it'll be close to half, if not half, or maybe more than half that say Mahomes is the GOAT.
Yeah, I think if you pull off that three-peat, you're probably looking at a close to a 60-40 split between voters, 60 of them being Tom, 40 of them being Mahomes, with Mahomes being under 30 still, right? So you'd have to think eventually Patrick Mahomes is going to end up taking that title. Right now, I would actually probably still have him behind Joe Montana in terms of accolades, right? In terms of just straight accolades. But when I look at ability, to me, just Patrick Mahomes is up there with some of the most talented people I've ever seen to throw a football in terms of their just football ability. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, that's in that class. But when you're talking about greatest of all time, you also have to combine that with winning, right? That's what changes you from just being, a guy who's got great arm talent.
You have all the ability in the world. If you don't win and have the accomplishments. I mean, Aaron Rodgers until Mahomes came along, you could argue he was the best we've ever seen throw the football. Obviously, Dan Marino. A lot of people still say he's the best passer they've ever seen. Marino never won a Super Bowl. He's not in the conversation. Aaron Rodgers, 1 Super Bowl win and 1 Super Bowl appearance. He's not in the conversation.
Right.
All right, so it's Brady right now, but you hear me, I say, and I've said this for a long time, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback I've ever seen. He is the best quarterback I've ever seen, but he is not the GOAT. You do have to have the accomplishments. It's almost like hip-hop. You can have a guy that's an incredible lyricist and a great rapper, but he doesn't make great songs, right? I mean, there are guys like that. The beats aren't that tight. The hook isn't right. Whatever it might be, but they're incredible wordsmith.
Like sonically, word in terms of the lyrics, in terms of everything, for whatever reason, it just doesn't resonate in the same way.
Right. Right. And so you to be the GOAT rapper in the conversation, you got to make hits. All right. And the same thing with this. You have to win championships. You have to have accolades. So it's Brady, but I do have Mahomes as number 2 ahead of Montana. I got Montana 3. But I have always said, Martin, it's not going to take 7 for Mahomes to become the GOAT,
Chris,
in my view.
If this time next year, if in fact the Kansas City Chiefs pull this off, there will be people shouting from the rooftops that Patrick Mahomes is the greatest of all time. And then when you ask, well, why over Brady? They're going to be like, well, when did Brady ever win 3 in a row?
Well, look, I think I've always said he needs to win 5. And I feel like, we'll see if he wins this championship, how it happens and all that. But I feel like now, even if he three-peats, I will still feel like not quite. Because 7, here's the thing about 7. 7 is more than any franchise. That's right. Any franchise has ever won. So, but Mahomes, I think it'll only take 5, and here's why I think he doesn't need 7. Because he has been more dominant individually than Tom Brady. Look, Brady a lot of people don't want to credit him as much for his first 3 Super Bowls because the defense was so big and he just wasn't quite the superstar yet that he would become. But here's what I say to that, Mark. You do have to give him major credit for those Super Bowls because, remember, and I say it a lot, but it's the truth. New England under Bill Belichick was 5-11 before the year before Brady took over. They were 0-2 with Drew Bledsoe as the quarterback, who was a Pro Bowler, $100 million man, the first $100 million man in the league. And they still couldn't win, and Brady steps in, and they immediately take off. They win 11 of their last 14 games, and they win the Super Bowl. I mean, a team that was darn near basically left for dead, and he turned them around. So his leadership, his intangibles, his smarts as a quarterback, all of that stuff came into play, but he still was not putting up huge numbers.
Well, see,
now he did lead the league in touchdowns his second year as a starter, but they didn't even make the playoffs that year, I don't believe. But I think Mahomes is off to the best start of any quarterback in history.
Well, also, too, Chris, the eye test. It's the eye test that I'm not saying that Brady does not pass the eye test by no stretch of the imagination. But when you look at what Mahomes does, the way he moves around, he was one of the first guys to really maximize scrambling to make a deeper pass, looking at some of the underhand passes, behind the back passes, some of the things that we've seen, like, there's only been one guy, Chris, and I know that there's been obviously more in history, but I'll talk about just strictly Martin Weiss's brain. There's only been one guy. When I watched that Tampa Bay Super Bowl where he lost, I said he threw 2 of the most impressive incompletions I've ever seen, right? And it's partly because of the way he's spinning around, laying parallel to the ground, and it was just hard to fault guys like DeMarcus Robinson who dropped one in the back corner of the end zone because most of the time after 6 seconds, the play is over with, right? Like most of the time after 6 seconds, you're not supposed to still be running routes, doing scramble drill as a wide receiver, and he kind of pulled up, and that's why it didn't end up being a touchdown in that end zone when Patrick Mahomes had no left tackles to speak of against that Tampa Bay defense, right?
Well, let me throw this at you because you alluded to it. The fact that Brady, in their head-to-head matchups, the ones that meant something, the Super Bowl and the AFC Championship when Mahomes' first year as a starter, Brady got the best of him. Brady beat him in the Super Bowl. Brady beat him in the AFC Championship in his 40s. So how much? Now, I get if you watch the games, you'll say Brady was still great.
Sure.
Mahomes was
not a knock on Brady at all
in his first year, second year, or first few years. But as time goes on and people get away from having seen the game live and all that, what they're going to say is, wait a minute. Brady was in his 40s. He clearly wasn't at his best,
right? And
he still beat Mahomes. How much of a factor is that for you? Because I think that's going to be a huge thing for the Brady crowd.
It'll be that conversation. Ultimately, they win 3-4 in a row. That conversation stops.
Well, 4 in a row.
But
4 in a row would give him 5 total and 4-peat. I mean, it's over.
Yeah, it'd be over. But
it's over.
If in fact it ends the way you're talking, I do think that if that's the case, then Brady probably should send D Ford an eligible arrangement and tell him thanks a lot for lining up off sides on that third down because we were off the field and the Chiefs would have won that game. And it would have been remembered more if it hadn't have been for just earlier on that day at the NFC Championship game, the worst non-call in NFL history that went so poorly that they ended up reviewing pass interference for an entire season. I think that's really what it boils down to me. I know you're right in that, you know, people are just going to point to the results of those games, but I ultimately think that over the next 3 to 4 years, Patrick Mahomes is going to win enough Super Bowls to where the result of that individual game and even the Super Bowl that he lost to Brady is going to be deemed irrelevant because of the success he has going forward in his career.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was the first. I don't know. I can't state that for a fact. But his first year as a starter when he had the 50 touchdowns, won the MVP, I said he's Jordan-esque. And boy, oh boy, now he's won earlier than Michael Jordan won, but he really is doing Jordan-esque type things in the NFL. I mean, how many quarterbacks, Lamar, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and we'll see, I think guys will win a Super Bowl. Mahomes can't win it every year, but he is keeping everyone from eating. You know, and that's how Jordan did. It was like, man, we can't get past this dude. We can't get a championship because he's there. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think he will be the GOAT when it's all said and done, but I can't give it to him right now.